Hi, I'm Ms. Hattie from Olympian High School. We're going to be using the Traditions and Encounters textbook, page 1142, to study the age of access. So this is from chapter 40. The essence of this section of your book is it's trying to communicate how the internet and communications technologies are transforming the world, and they're basically making it possible for ideas to spread, but that there are issues with that access. The access isn't always universal. So that means not everyone has the access to things like internet and cell phone technology. And so that's a potential for a gap between inequity and things not being equal for people around the world. And also that this internet access is sometimes seen as potentially a form of cultural imperialism, promoting American values and the English language, and how some people try to protect or counter that with things like internet censorship and control. And so that's the essence of this section, and I'm going to go through it and give you some things that are interesting to look at and study. Now, of course, this book is older, so some of the information is outdated. So first of all, this is not a new process. It's been happening since the beginning of time. Technological advances have always made it more possible for people to interact with cultures that are different from them. For example, shipbuilding technologies made it possible to travel to new places and learn about other people, other localities. And today we have a lot more electronic communications. Some people who are modern, contemporary observers of our time call this time period that we're living in the age of access. So you have technologies like radio, telephone, television, fax machine, computers. You also have all of the new social media sites that make it possible to see people from other parts of the world, and also to coordinate political activities for activists to unite towards a specific cause. Now, because it takes capital, which means money, resources, to get access, it's not always a fair access. So people in poorer parts of the world may not have access to the same technologies. And so this can create a gap between the rich and the poor, and this may be exacerbated as time goes on. As you know, as we move towards the future, will there be a greater division between people that have access and people that don't, or will it be something that resolves itself? You also have an issue with the preeminence of the English language. So preeminence is when some language, or in this case a language, but when something is more dominant than others, it's hegemonic. And so we do have some people that feel like this is a type of a cultural imperialism, because the internet is so often produced by Europeans and Americans. And so that's made English be the necessary language to learn and study. Now, this is already associated with old school imperialism, the imperialism that you studied in the past, because England literally had colonies all around the world. And so the colonized often had to learn English in order to find a place for themselves in the socioeconomic hierarchy. They had access to jobs, more access to jobs if they knew the language of the colonizer. And nowadays, a lot of the content that's produced on the internet is geared towards English speakers. And so some countries like China find a problem with that, and you can read about what Xie Hong says. And, some of the Chinese political thinkers have been so upset with this, and they want to create more of a Chinese-style internet. But they also want some censorship of information. And so they've created a firewall, which is basically a type of way of censoring what people in China have access to. This used to be called the Fanghua Qiang. It's more popularly called the Wangguan. We don't know if it's going to be successful. When I was in China, I've been to China twice. When I was in China, people told me about ways that they found around the firewall. But it's something that's still in effect, and you can read about it. This is a more recent article, What to Expect from Internet in China, that you could study, and you could, do a little bit of research and find out what do people have access to in China, so that if you ever travel to China, you know that some of the sites that you normally typically visit will be restricted because of the Chinese Communist Party that's there. You also see adaptations of technology to meet the needs sometimes of state leaders. So, for example, there used to be a country called Zaire. So Africa has had a lot of name changes. This used to be the country called the Belgian Congo, and now it's called the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, right here. And that when it was Zaire, there was a president that they had that used to portray himself, President Mobutu would portray himself emerging from these beautiful clouds, and he would give this like inspirational message. And this is obviously a way that political leaders can use information technology and use television and use communications to push their own agendas, to control what they want their followers to see. So this is something that you guys could look into on your own. And I know in Iraq, the country that I'm from, the TV was heavily censored, what you had access to at the time that there was a dictator, Saddam Hussein, that was in power. So, Vietnam has had similar experiences. And so this paragraph is highlighting for you that sometimes political leaders try to control access to certain technologies so that they can deliver a message that's convenient for them or that is supportive of their own regimes. One interesting thing I'd like you to look into, if your parents allow it, is this really interesting series of episodes on the Arab Spring, which I'll be teaching you about in a series of video lectures later. This won't be on the AP test, but it's good to know. It's about a series of revolutions that took place starting in 2011, and this analyzes or argues it analyzes the role of technology in fostering the Arab Spring, the series of revolutions. And it argues that Facebook, social media, was largely responsible for the organizers organizing their demonstrations. Now, whether you agree with that or not, it's up for debate, but it's interesting to look at. So I'll play just 30 seconds of it for you.
This year, the Arab world erupted as a generation of young people, no longer prepared to suffer in silence, rose up against the hated despots who ruled their countries.
Gaddafi is destroying our country, and now we can't test the freedom.
But the way these revolutions began caught the world off guard. The weapons of the activists of the so-called Arab Spring weren't guns and bombs, but the internet and the mobile phone. For the first time in history, world-changing events were recorded hour by hour by the man and woman on the street. A unique filmed record now exists, charting the downfall of tyrants in Tunisia.
So this is super fascinating, and if you're interested, you can look into that potentially for extra credit. So, we could relate some of this old information in your book to current events that are taking place. Perhaps you can see parallels to other activist movements that are more current, but something to think about for potentially future patterns and future concerns about, for example, access to internet technology, whether that's creating inequities, all of these interesting trends that we want to be aware of as we move from studying history to studying current events.